Billionaire CEO tried everything. Then the janitor's secret changed her son. Before we begin, take a moment to comment your city. Where are you watching from today? And once the story is over, don't forget to rate it from 0 to 10. Enjoy the story. The neon lights of the 36th floor hallway at Sterling Tower spilled down in a cold, lonely glow. A 10-year-old boy, Carter Sterling, stood trembling before a temporary whiteboard, the marker in his hand feeling as heavy as stone. Behind him, the sound of rolling cartwheels echoed. Elias Flynn, the janitor in his dark blue uniform, paused mid-stride. A mop still in one hand, he froze when he noticed the boy watching him. And the equation he had just scribbled on the board, as if it were a secret game. In that single moment, two worlds that should have never touched suddenly collided: the billionaire's son and the man who cleaned his family's floors. And a question hung in the air, one that could stop anyone in their tracks. Why would a billionaire's son choose to learn from a janitor up on the 39th floor? Sterling Enterprises glowed brightly that night, but it wasn't a warm light. It was the harsh white glare of fluorescent bulbs reflected in towering panes of glass. Outside, Manhattan shimmered with headlights and billboards, but inside that vast office, the air was heavy enough to cut. Evelyn Sterling, 38, sat rigid behind a massive walnut desk. Her tailored suit framed her proud figure, yet every flawless line of her face was drawn tight with pressure. Her platinum hair was pinned back, without a strand out of place. Her steel gray eyes locked onto the papers in her hand. It was Carter's report card. Carter, only 10, sat hunched at a small desk by the window. His thin back curled inward, small fingers gripping a pencil as though it might slip away. His eyes were rimmed red lashes trembling as they fought to hold back tears. Before him, the numbers sprawled like mockery, every red mark on the page slicing deeper into a fragile sense of worth. Evelyn set the papers down with a sharp thud. The sound struck colder than any scolding. Carter, her voice was measured, every word precise, stripped of warmth. If you don't improve by the end of this term, I'll send you to Thornfield Academy. They know how to correct children who are stubborn and who fail. Her words fell into the room like a sentence passed. Carter lifted his face, lips trembling to speak, but his throat locked. He was used to seeing disappointment in his mother's eyes, but this was different. This was the fear of being left behind, of being torn from the only world he knew. Beyond the glass, the city lights blinked, indifferently blind to the storm inside. Evelyn turned away, hiding the flicker of doubt in her eyes. She told herself this was right, that she was protecting the Sterling legacy at all costs. Yet in that fleeting moment, she felt the distance growing, a wall of glass and stone rising between her and her son. Carter bowed his head, and at last a tear slipped free, soaking into the red ink on the page. In the silence of his heart, a question cried out, "Is there anyone in this world who truly understands me?" And from that unspoken question, a chance encounter on the 36th floor was about to change everything. Chapter 1. The Failing Envelope. The small classroom reserved for the executive's children at Sterling Tower smelled tonight of dry erase ink and the polished wood of the long table pressed against the wall. Overhead, lights poured down like cold water, bouncing off the tabletop and striking the ivory envelope lying motionless in the center, like a dead fish stilled in the middle of a lake. Carter sat at the head of the table, small as a misplaced comma in an overlong sentence. He bowed his head, both hands gripping the sheet inside the envelope, a test paper blotched with red marks, each one a tiny coal pressed to his heart. Every circled number, every crossout cut like a fine blade. The longer he looked, the more his eyes burned. Behind him, Evelyn stood straight, her shadow falling to the floor in a clean, sharp line with no room for softness. "Look the truth in the eye, Carter," Evelyn said, voice low, and even as if she were reading a contract clause. "You cannot continue like this." Carter swallowed. The dry click sounded like a pebble dropped into the bottom of a glass. He wanted to say, "I tried," but his throat cinched tight as if tied with an invisible cord. He set the paper down where the light fell at an angle, making the red veil in the corner flash like a warning. The red comments below it looked like the tangled footprints of someone lost in the snow. He remembered sitting glued to his desk the night before, scribbling, erasing, while the wall clock counted to infinity. But when he turned, the test in his mind went blank, as if someone had wiped the board clean. Shame, this feeling of not enough, crawled from the nape of his neck to the center of his palms, hot and prickling. Evelyn rounded the table and sat across from him. The faint scent that rose from her suit was both crisp and cold, an expensive fragrance, but one with no memory attached. "Thornfield Academy has a program for cases like yours," she said, each syllable dropping straight down like hammered nails. "Discipline, timetables, systems. You need a place like that." Thornfield slammed shut like a door in Carter's head. He'd heard kids upstairs on the 39th floor talk about it like a luxury boot camp. Rows of beds, made with military corners, a morning whistle footsteps, marching in perfect rhythm across the yard. He pictured leaves on the grounds falling in formation. No laughter from his mother there. No warm smell of bread from the corner shop he passed each morning. There, everything would look exactly like the paper in his hands, too white and too red. Carter ventured, his voice thin as thread. "I studied, Mom. I studied like you told me, but when the test starts, everything just runs away." "Runs away?" Evelyn tilted her head. Her gray eyes stayed calm, though something flickered at the bottom and vanished. "Then you chase it. That's your job." Carter stared at the faint blue veins at his wrist. "I chased it. But it's like running down a hallway with no windows." Evelyn didn't answer at once. She laced her fingers and set them on the table. His words pulled her back to 21, a newly widowed young woman holding the remnants of her husband's legacy, standing in a boardroom where everyone was older and waiting for her to slip. Back then, she had learned not to let fear run away from her, but to lock the door, sit it in the corner, and make it stay. That was how she survived. She believed her son could too. But then she glanced at the paper, at Carter's slanted numbers, the letter shapes that sometimes looked like he was trying to grab something and missed. She caught an A turned into an O mid-page, a smeared 6, as if his hand had dragged across it while his heart raced. A brief warmth loosened in her chest. She smoothed it flat and put it away. Next week, Evelyn said more gently, "I'll increase your tutoring sessions. I've also booked another specialist. This one's Harvard trained." Carter nodded by reflex. "Yes, ma'am." The word Harvard felt like a suit 2 sizes too big, heavy and slippery. He didn't dare say, "I'm scared," because fear had no place in their home, not on the 39th floor, not in the sterling name. He only made himself smaller, as if taking up less space might help him snag fewer edges in this world. Beyond the glass, Manhattan flickered like an upside-down sky. Carter pressed his cheek to the paper, breathing in paper ink, the plastic sheen of the table, and a lingering hint of floor cleaner from the afternoon. He liked that smell, even though his mother frowned at it. It was the smell of someone has been here, people who didn't sit in boardrooms or wear suits, but left traces more honest than any report could. He'd once seen a janitor pushing a cart down the hall. Sleeves rolled a worn notebook tucked on the shelf. He'd wondered then, do grown-ups write things that aren't about money and plans, and laughed at himself because such a discovery had no place in his mother's world. Evelyn stood and leaned in to straighten his collar. Those 10 seconds were the softest part of her day. "My son is smart," she said evenly, as if stating a theorem. "Intelligence is a responsibility." Her hand rested on his hair for a heartbeat. Carter closed his eyes, the light touch corking his throat like a stopper that wouldn't pop. She drew back, slid the paper into the envelope, and nudged it toward him. "Keep it. Look at it every day. Remember what you must do." Carter nodded. "Yes, ma'am." The envelope's edge rasped his finger as he took it just enough to sting. When Evelyn left, her heels tapped so clearly across the empty floor that Carter could count each step, fading away. The door clicked. The room breathed out. He set the envelope down, opened the paper again, and searched for something to hold on to. There was a geometry section, overlapping triangles, that he remembered actually understanding at home. He'd pictured them as tent roofs in a campsite, ropes pulled taut between stakes. He'd rebuilt them in his head and felt a spark of joy. But when he entered the exam room, the tents vanished, leaving only symbols as dry as scorched grass. He wished someone would talk to him in the language he understood, the language of images and stories, instead of lines of text standing like guards shouting in his face. The door eased open. Not his mother. A woman from admin poked her head in, offered a quick smile, rolled a small cart over, and set down a tray of water and a few boxes of markers. "For tonight's tutoring," she said. Carter nodded, thanking her with a thin smile. When she left, the lemon tang of cleaner lingered. His eyes cooled. He packed his notebook slowly, fingertips drifting along the table's edge. He felt an odd grain, just the smallest crack like a scar, right where a person's hands would usually rest. He pressed his finger to it and imagined how many stories this table had heard, how many sighs. He wanted to whisper into the wood grain, "Don't tell anyone I cried." Soft wheels whispered in the hallway, then stopped. Carter glanced up. In the milky reflection of the glass pane, a man appeared, deep blue uniform, one hand on a cart, the other steering a rolling whiteboard, the kind used for quick presentations in a conference room. Carter had never seen anyone push a whiteboard like a cart. The man paused, checked the hallway corner, slipped inside, and eased the whiteboard against the far wall. He moved as if afraid to wake someone. Carter recognized his steady face, the janitor, with the old notebook. "Sorry, kid," the man said in a low voice, taking a soft cloth to the board. "Thought the room was empty." "It's okay, sir." Carter wiped his eyes on his sleeve. He didn't want the man to see they were red, and then felt ashamed for being afraid. The man gave a brief smile, the kind a traveler learns on long night roads, saving energy for everything. He set the board just right, returned to the cart, and placed the spray bottle carefully. Carter watched his hands, thin calluses at the knuckles. The man had a small habit. When concentrating, he tapped the pocket over his chest. The one puffed just slightly, as if a notebook lay inside. Carter didn't know why, but he wanted to ask something. What came out sounded silly. "Do you like the lemon smell in the floor cleaner?" The man chuckled under his breath, the sound like a hard candy rolling in a palm. "I do. Smells like clean. And clean to me is a kind of hope." Carter nodded, wondering what hope might smell like. He glanced at the test paper and quickly folded it. The man had already noticed. He didn't say, "Sorry." He didn't say, "It's okay, grades aren't everything." He didn't deliver a cheap speech. He only cocked his head, as if to see the paper from another angle with him. Hardy asked like he might ask about the weather. Carter stopped, realizing he'd just called himself I, his default with adults. He cleared his throat. "I understand when I study, but when I'm testing, everything hides behind the symbols." The man nodded, a smile flickering in his eyes without reaching his mouth. "When you study, you draw the road. When you test, you try to photograph it. Photos are flatter than roads. Roads have surprise turns." Carter opened his mouth, then closed it. The way he spoke reminded Carter of the times he secretly turned math into a game in his head. Numbers strolling across a bridge. Straight lines, tightropes over air. Right angles the corner, where he hit a marble. I imagined things, Carter confessed, warmth creeping into his cheeks. "Mom says I shouldn't. Tests don't have room for imagination." "Boards do," the man said, patting the white surface like greeting an old friend. "So do long hallways. And a mop does when it must." He lifted a marker from the cart's tray and held it up a touch sheepishly, like someone about to break a rule. "Quick question," he murmured, glancing around. "Anyone using this room in 5 minutes?" "No, sir," Carter said, checking the wall clock. "The teacher, the specialist is running late." The man smiled. "Teachers are good, but 5 minutes won't get me fired." He turned to the board, drew a simple curve, starting low, arcing up, then dropping in a soft snap, like a stretched rubber band released. Carter's eyes brightened. "Trajectory," the man whispered. "You throw a ball from here." He dotted the starting point. "If we know how hard you throw and how the wind blows, we can predict where it lands." Carter stepped closer without noticing. "But the numbers, I get scared when I see too many symbols." "Then don't look at symbols first," he said. "Look at the story first. Numbers are letters. The story is the grammar." He sketched a few small pictures beneath a baseball, a little boat, a gust of wind with an arrow. "Here's the problem. But to me, it's a park by the river. A kid throws a ball to his dad. He throws too hard. The ball sails past the glove. Will the dad catch it?" He set the marker down. "If you read it like that, don't you want to know the answer?" Carter swallowed. Yes. He imagined the pop of the ball in the glove, the rustle of dry grass, a man running breath ragged. He'd never lived that memory, but picturing it warmed his chest. Who are you, sir?" "I'm Elias," he said, as if answering a riddle with only one right reply. "Are you a teacher?" The question slipped out before Carter could stop it. The man paused for half a second, long enough for a thin breeze to pass the door. Then he shook his head, a slow smile spreading. "These days, I'm the one who keeps these floors clean," he said. "Clean is a kind of hope. Remember?" Carter smiled the first one all night. It was no more than a pinprick of light in a cloudy sky, but enough to show him a path. Somewhere down the hall, an elevator chimed, as if announcing someone's approach. Elias glanced toward the door and capped the marker. "Time's up," he said softly. "But I think if you read your test, like a story, like Does the Dad Catch the Ball?, the symbols will feel less mean." He eased the board back to the wall, tucking it into the corner, as if no ink had cut across it. "Thank you, Sir Carter," said his voice clearer now. He wanted to ask for more, to beg for another story. But the door opened. Shoes struck the floor. A bright voice rang out, "Carter, ready. We're doing quadratics tonight, so fun, trust me." The newcomer gleamed like a polished fish. He shook Carter's hand, scanned the room, and frowned at the whiteboard's new angle. Elias was already in the hall, hands on the cart, eyes lowered back to an invisible silhouette. The session ran long. The specialist's voice hummed like a conveyor belt. Carter tried to swim along. Whenever his mind fogged, he glanced at the corner where the whiteboard stood. He remembered the black arc, the small baseball. He tried to read the lesson like a story. If X is the number of steps, at which step does Dad catch the ball? A small magic happened. The symbols grew less hostile. They stopped playing gatekeeper and turned into signposts. When the lesson ended, Carter felt wrung out, but in that weariness, a drop of warmth. He packed up, slid the merciless verdict back into its envelope. As he zipped his backpack, his fingers brushed something tucked in the outer pocket, a folded cream slip heavier than notebook paper. He opened it. 4 lines of neat slanted black ink. A ship with 30 sailors divides 120 barrels of water and 60 crates of rations for a 10-day voyage. On day 4, the wind shifts. The captain must increase speed, consuming 20% more per day. Question: how can the crew still reach the freshwater island in time when the wind is set to shift again in 3 days? Hint: change the division, change the story. E.F. Carter stared at the last 2 letters. E.F. and his heart skipped oddly. He looked toward the door. The hallway lay empty floors, clean and bright. He folded the note and slid it into the small pocket where he kept precious things, like the colored stone he'd found in the park. The paper still smelled of fresh ink, threaded with lemon, and the cool metal of the doorknob. He didn't know why, but he wanted to run into the hall and say thank you, to show Elias how he'd split the water, and rations, how he'd changed the story. Evelyn called right then, voice brisk. "I'm in a meeting. The driver's on his way down. Go meet him. And Carter, keep that paper. Don't throw it out. We need to remember where we stand." "Yes," Carter said. He looked at the envelope, then at the new note, feeling 2 worlds touch in his backpack. A white and red world of judgment, and a black ink world that told stories of wind and sea. On the ride home, the car slid through intersections dusted with yellow light, like fine powder. Carter leaned his head to the window and imagined himself a cabin boy on deck, the salt-sting, hair-blown, wild eyes fixed on the horizon. He portioned water in his head, split rations, and realized the hint change, the division change. The story was more than a math trick. It was a door into a world where red marks didn't freeze him in fear. Instead of being judged, he was invited to tell. And when he was the storyteller, he didn't feel small. That night, back in their high-rise apartment, he sat at his desk, a smaller table than the one at the office, but warmer, scarred with pencil smudges his mother had scolded 100 times. He set EF's note beside the failing envelope. He pulled out scrap paper and drew a ship, then barrels with open lids like crescent moons, then winged as arrows, long and short. He began to calculate. He was wrong. He crossed it out. He tried again. Wrong. Again. He sighed, then suddenly laughed, realizing he was doing what those red letters never allowed, being wrong without feeling ashamed. In the corner, he wrote 3 small words, like a whisper, sent to the one who'd left him. The note, "I'm on my way." The bedroom door swung open. Evelyn leaned in the frame hallway light behind her, turning her into a bright stone bust. She looked over the desk, the scattered pages, the envelope placed neatly to one side like a mile marker. She stepped in and touched the back of his chair. "It's late, Carter." Her voice dropped. It rarely did. 2 tutoring sessions tomorrow. "Yes, ma'am." Carter slid his hand over EF's note, not because he feared his mother seeing it, but because he wanted to keep this secret warm a little longer, like shielding a small flame from the wind. Evelyn's gaze paused on the sketch of the ship. She almost said, "Don't doodle," but the word "don't" stuck uselessly in her throat. She drew a breath, remembering how her hand had rested on his head that afternoon, how that brief touch had clicked shut a tiny draft. "Sleep," she said. "I'll take you in early." When the lights went out, the city beyond still glowed. Carter lay on his side hugging a pillow softened by years. In the hush, he heard waves lapping, not from a real shore, but from the wind, whispering across the paper on his desk. Somewhere in the building, a man in a deep blue uniform sat on a stairwell to rest, opened an old notebook, and wrote, "The boy has an eye for story. Leave him something on the east wind tomorrow." Then he lifted his head, heard the elevator doors close, and breathed in lemon, the clean kind of hope filling an empty corridor. At dawn, Carter woke early. He ate quickly and shouldered his bag. On the way to the tower, he kept working the ship problem in his head, and suddenly it all made sense when he imagined the first mate stepping forward with a clear order, the crew changing the schedule, changing the portions, changing the route. He smiled to himself. For the first time in a long while, he wanted to go to that classroom, not to endure it, but to see what story might open next. The company classroom was still and bright. Carter reached for his books when his hand brushed something in the outer pocket. He pulled out another folded note. Same cream paper, the ink still fragrant. The outside still read, "EF." His heart kicked, like the moment just before the climax of a film. He opened it. Suppose instead of increasing consumption, the ship cuts speed and trims the sails to sail across the wind. What happens to the trajectory then? Who said straight is always the fastest PS. Every problem has a softer path. Carter couldn't help it. Laughter slipped out into the empty room. It echoed, tapped the wall, fell to the wooden floor, and faded like foam. On the back, he scrawled a quick reply. The letters still unsteady, I think. If we change the sail angle, we tell the wind a different story. The wind will push us a new way. He folded the note and tucked it into the slit of the gray metal supply cabinet in the corner, the secret address he guessed. He stepped back like someone mailing a letter long ago. In that moment, he forgot there was something called Thornfield, something called red marks. He remembered only that a stranger had drawn him a curve and told him every problem has a softer path. When Evelyn's heels clicked at the door, Carter turned school calm. She looked at his face and caught a rare thing, the playful light of a new riddle. She didn't ask why. She simply set a hand on his shoulder and pressed long enough for them both to feel the warmth. "Let's go," she said. "Today will be long." "Yes," Carter answered and followed her out. The failing envelope was still in his bag, but it didn't weigh him down like last night. Beside it lay 2 black ink notes about wind and sea. 2 worlds lay together lightly touching like ripples meeting mid-river. Where they met, a 10-year-old boy began to believe he could read life the way he read a story. And once he could read the story, the numbers would behave, the hallways would shrink, and fear would stop running. At that crossing point, the failing envelope was no longer a sentence, but the first page of a new book, where red letters turned into exclamation points for a journey just beginning. Chapter 2. The Hallway Whiteboard. On the 36th floor of Sterling Tower, the hallway carried a strange kind of light at night, that blue-white neon that never goes out, laying a thin mist over everything it touched. The water dispenser beside the glass wall purred softly. Beads of water clung to the spout and glittered like tiny crystal seeds. Next to it stood a small rolling whiteboard, its wheels so worn that every push made the faintest creak like a hidden cricket. The lemon-clean scent of floor solution was still fresh, braided with the plastic smell of dry erase markers and a thin metallic note from the door handle. Elias stopped his utility cart there. By habit, he checked the stretch of corridor square, straight running to the far end, where an abstract painting hung precisely between 2 lights. At Sterling, the walls told stories of money and ambition. But this small corner, the water dispenser, the whiteboard, the cart was one of the few that told a different story. The story of quiet footsteps, passing each night of hands that once held chalk, now holding a cleaning rag, and of a boy learning how to breathe inside a world of straight lines. Carter arrived 10 minutes before tutoring because he couldn't bear to sit any longer in the classroom with the dark wood table where the ivory envelope had once lain like a sentence. He stopped short when he saw Elias, the man in the deep blue uniform sleeves, lightly rolled, polishing the board surface the way you greet an old friend. Elias looked up. His light brown eyes held a gentle warmth, like the small stove light that stays on in a cold kitchen at night. "You again," Carter said, trying to smooth the edge off his nerves. "Do you have 5 minutes?" Elias glanced at the wall clock. 4.5. He answered, the corner of his mouth lifting. "Let's see what we can do with 4.5. Carter slid down to sit on the floor, back to the wall knees, pulled in eyes fixed on the board with a new kind of focus. Sitting on the ground in a place like Sterling was a small act of rebellion, and it helped him breathe. From there, he could see the neon lines reflected on the polished floor like water, and the passing shoes at the far bend, all of it like stippled strokes on a vast canvas. Elias raised a marker, then paused, listening for approaching footsteps. None came. He drew a fine straight line and labeled one end A, the other B. He wasn't brisk about it, didn't treat the letters like commands. He made them 2 points on a faintly imagined road. Between A and B, Elias said in a low, even voice, more a soundtrack than a sentence, there are countless ways to go. But people usually tell you go straight. It's faster. Carter nodded, thinking of the arrow straight paths in his reference books. The step 1, step 2, step 3, instructions. The gleaming straight edge his mother bought him sharp as a scalpel. Elias drew a soft curve from A, that ribbon toward B, and touched it. Some days the wind hits your face and the straight line is a wall. Some days the wind pushes your back and the curve becomes a slide. The softer path isn't the lazy one. It's the path that knows how to listen. Listen to what Carter looked up, eyes wide. Listen to the story, Elias said, sketching a tiny dot by A and adding a smile, turning it into a little boy, so childlike a doodle that he chuckled at his own naivete. A is you. B is where the problem wants you to go. If all you have are symbols, they feel like gates with guards. But if A knows who he is, what he carries, what weather he's walking in, then B won't feel so far. Elias switched to a finer tip and wrote a few symbols underneath V0GT. He didn't recite them dryly. He touched each one the way a musician touches a note. This is your initial push, like the moment you gather courage. This is gravity, everything heavy in you, pulling down. This is time something grown-ups forget, has a smell for kids. Some days, it smells like waffles. Some days, it stings like disinfectant. Carter let out a small laugh. He remembered a night at the hospital when a little girl, he didn't know her name, then only that she had an inhaler, walked past him, and the disinfectant clung to his jacket all evening. He remembered mornings when his mother drove him by the bakery, and butter melted into the first sunlight and slipped into his hair. That's why Elias went on to reach B. Some days, we don't bang our heads against a wall. We step back, change the release angle, and change how we talk to the wind. He dropped to one knee and angled the board lower, as if telling Carter a secret. All right, tell me this. When you look at a problem, what do you see in your head? Carter stayed quiet a beat. He had learned adults rarely ask that. They ask, what's the answer? And why? But not what do you see? In his head, he saw triangle tents on grass. The guy lines turning into edges, small figures darting about the wind, tugging his little sails. He described it shy at first, afraid of being scolded for daydreaming, then bolder when Elias didn't cut him off. Right, Elias said, eyes bright, like someone hearing a beloved song he hasn't heard in years. You're translating from number language to picture language, and from picture language to story language. People pay a lot of money to anyone who can translate. Carter grinned this time clearly. But tests don't pay for stories. Tests pay points for correct answers. Elias nodded. Stories give stamina to the heart. To travel far, you need both. He handed Carter the marker. Try this. Imagine you're at A on one riverbank. B is the other side. No bridge. You've got a long rope, a stake, and a friend willing to hold the other end. Build the picture. The dry erase in Carter's hand felt surprisingly soft. Nothing like the HB pencil he gripped at home, like a chisel on stone. He drew a riverbank, small curved lines, for waves himself. At A, crouched like a cat on tiptoe, and his friend across the water, with a hand raised. He pulled a straight line for the rope, then corrected himself and sagged it into a curve, scribbling zip line beside it and crossing it out because it made him laugh. Elias laughed too and nodded as if congratulating a small discovery. Good. Now, how do you say that? In math, Carter pressed his lips together, brow folding an eager kind of frown, like someone rummaging for a missing puzzle piece in memory. I name the distance AB. Call it D. If the rope is long enough, it sags. I think I should estimate the lowest point of the sag to see if it touches the water. He hesitated, but he could see the picture, the hammock strung between two trees at the park, where he had once stretched out and counted clouds. See? Elias drew a tiny axis and wrote D neatly. When you name things, you do two acts at once. You honor the world of math, and you keep your story alive. Those two aren't enemies. An elevator bell chimed in the distance. Elias paused, listening. The footsteps went toward a far conference room, not toward them. He let out a breath, so light it was almost invisible, and added a wind arrow, a few time marks. Try one more thing, he said, lowering his voice like sharing a chapel secret. Whenever panic hits, heart-racing hands, cold don't read the symbols. Read your breath. Take 3 slow breaths. Each breath is a sentence in the story. Ball leaves. Ball travels. Ball arrives. At the end of the third sentence, start writing. Carter looked at him, and in that icy neon, a different warmth appeared, the kind no bulb makes. He set the marker down and counted silently. Leaves, travels, arrives. He hadn't expected it to be that simple. The fear loosened like a scarf unknotted from his neck. He laughed an abrupt small laugh like the first raindrop on a brittle summer noon. It was the laugh of a child who has held it in too long. Elias startled, then laughed too low and quiet the bass line of an old jazz tune. He'd never heard that sound from Carter before. It wasn't loud or showy. It was the truest answer to a question no one bothered to ask. You've got a good laugh, kid, Elias said, teasing gently. Keep it. Laughing teaches your lungs to talk to your heart. Carter wiped at the corner of his eye, embarrassed. I forgot this feeling, he admitted, like learning without being scared. Don't run from fear, Elias said, returning the marker to the tray. Walk alongside it for a while. It'll tire out first. Footsteps quickened at the far end. A group of employees passed, talking about a contract, laughter, sharp as glass, a streak of perfume trailing after them. No one glanced toward the water dispenser corner, where a boy sat on the floor and a man in blue stood by a tiny whiteboard. They were invisible in every sense, and in that invisibility, the most important thing was happening. Time for me to move, Elias said softly, sliding the board closer to the wall so it wouldn't draw eyes. From his chest pocket, he pulled a small square of paper folded twice and set it on the dispenser's lip, carefully making it look like a misplaced memo. If anyone asks, he winked at Carter. This is a note about the water cooler inspection protocol. Carter bit back a smile and took the paper after Elias gave a slight nod. He opened it once Elias had pushed the card away, rolling slowly down the hall. Inside, in neat slanted black ink, was a problem only a few lines long. A baseball is thrown from a height of 1.5 meters, with initial velocity v0 at angle θ. A headwind blows at speed w. 1. Choose the story to read this problem. If the wind were a character, what would it want? 2. Write 3 sentences: leaves, travels, arrives. Place the variables inside them. P.S. If your hand shakes, take a sip of water. The dispenser is your friend. Below were the same 2 letters. E.F. Carter looked up at the dispenser and laughed again. The dispenser is your friend, he whispered. He pressed the button and took a sip. The water was cold, soft, clean, sliding down his throat like a thin cord, tugging him back to earth after weeks of floating in fog. He glanced around. The hallway was the same as ever: cold, long, abstract art, the occasional echo of shoes. But something had changed. Somewhere on that spotless white surface, a black streak of ink had drawn a softer path, and he knew he could step onto it. The tutor arrived late. While he waited, Carter sat on the floor beside the dispenser, marker in hand, and wrote 3 small words along the bottom edge of E.F.'s paper, the same words he'd written last night on the pirate note, "I'm on my way." Then he folded it and slipped it into the smallest pocket of his bag, where he kept rare things: a pale blue stone from the park, an old subway ticket his mother gave him at 4, and now these slips of paper that smelled of ink and lemon. The classroom door breathed open, the tutor hustling in with a stack of handouts. He apologized for traffic and launched into quadratics like a train pulling out of a station. Carter followed, no longer swimming upstream in despair. Whenever he got pulled off course, he paused for a breath and murmured, "Leaves, travels, arrives." Strangely, the radical signs looked less like sharp blades. They became revolving doors. Push at the right spot, and they open. The session ran late. Carter packed up and stepped into the hallway. At the corner, Elias was checking an outlet, head slightly bowed, hands deft. He glanced up at Carter's footsteps. Neither of them raised a voice, just a small nod, the signal of co-conspirators. Carter laid a hand over his heart, 3 beats. Elias understood at once, lifted 3 fingers, then closed them as if grasping an invisible cord. From the end of the hall, the elevator chimed again. This time, Carter recognized the rhythm of the heels, his mother's sure step. For a flicker of a moment, he felt 2 worlds drawing close: the polished world of conference rooms and the warm world of the hallway, with its whiteboard and water dispenser. He didn't know how they would collide, whether they'd shatter or flow together into something calm. But one thing in his chest felt certain: when these worlds met, he wouldn't be alone. Elias pushed his cart the other way, so he wouldn't accidentally cross paths with someone who didn't need to see him. Carter stood, dusted his pants, and tucked E.F.'s note into his bag. The elevator doors slid open, and a bath of yellow light spilled onto the white floor. Evelyn stepped out, her face composed as ever, but when she caught her son, perched by the dispenser, with a curve still on his lips, she faltered. That smile, small as an opening parenthesis, she hadn't seen it in a long time. "Let's go," Evelyn said. Her voice didn't change, but her hand settled on his shoulder a half-second longer than usual. That half-second, like the beat when Elias paused before writing a symbol, was the space Hope needs to slip in. Carter nodded and fell in step beside her. As they passed the little whiteboard, he glanced quickly, as if sending a silent promise. Tomorrow we'll talk to the wind again. And in that instant, beneath the neon hum, beside the purring water dispenser, in the clean scent of lemon and the distant tremor of meetings, a 10-year-old boy laughed for the second time in weeks. It was brief and quiet, the sound of someone who has found a compass. And each time that compass trembled, it pointed to something simple. Every problem has a softer path. Chapter 3. The Secret Notes. Carter's bedroom was bathed in the warm yellow glow of a small desk lamp. Its light fell across his notebook in soft circles, like moons rippling on a lake's surface. Beyond the window, the city still pulsed with rushing headlights. But inside the room, there was only the faint tap of a pencil against wood and the steady breath of a boy trying to reclaim a rhythm of his own. From the outer pocket of his school bag, Carter pulled a folded slip of paper. The edges were slightly rough, as if someone had once crumpled it in their palm and then smoothed it carefully flat. His heart thudded, part fear, part excitement, like he had just uncovered a treasure hidden in a secret drawer of a fairy tale house. He unfolded it slowly, the crease whispering a faint shh, and glanced around, afraid his mother might hear. But the apartment was still broken only by the sigh of wind at the glass. On the paper wasn't the lifeless string of numbers from his textbooks. Instead, it was a story problem. A band of pirates has found 120 barrels of gold. They must divide it among the crew. But each day, the waves take some away. How can they share fairly and still have enough to reach the final treasure island? The words were written in black ink, slightly slanted neat, as if shaped by someone used to writing for children to read. At the bottom corner were 3 small letters E.F. Carter read, and his eyes clouded for days with tears suddenly lit up. He didn't see numbers meant to frighten him. He saw a ship's sails torn and flapping rough sailors scratching their heads in thought. He imagined himself, the young captain, deciding how to portion the gold so the crew wouldn't revolt. Each division in his notebook became a barrel placed on deck, one for each man. By the 5th day, he sketched a storm in the corner, a towering wave swallowing a few barrels, forcing him to recalculate. His lips curved just a half smile, but so rare it startled even him. He finished, set his pencil down, and drew a long breath. The feeling was strange and new. Learning no longer felt like a battle, but like an adventure. In his mind, Elias's gentle hallway voice returned. Read the story first. Numbers are just letters. The story is the grammar. Carter's heart beat quick and strong. He picked up his pencil again and added one line at the bottom of the note. The captain reached the island. Thank you. Then he folded it carefully, as if guarding a sacred secret. The lamplight shimmered in his eyes. The red fear of failed grades began to fade, replaced by the small flame of curiosity. For the first time in weeks, he didn't feel like the boy who always failed tests. He felt like a storyteller, a captain guiding his crew through storms. He closed his notebook, slipped the folded note into a drawer, and climbed into bed. He pulled the blanket to his chest, eyes still glowing as though a lantern inside him had been switched on. Before sleep came, he promised himself tomorrow he would find a way to send a message back to the one who had slipped this paper into his bag. Because maybe this wasn't just a game. Maybe it was a promise that learning could be an adventure and that he didn't have to walk it alone. And as the city outside exhaled, Carter drifted into sleep. On his desk, the folded slip still caught the lamplight quiet witness to a secret just beginning a secret that would change his life forever. Chapter 4: The Forgotten Teacher. The 36th floor hallway lay silent, broken only by the hum of the air conditioner and the soft roll of rubber wheels gliding over polished tile. The familiar scent of lemon filled the air, a quiet signature of nights when Elias worked. Carter followed close behind, his school bag heavy on his shoulders, his heart racing with anticipation. Tucked inside was the pirate problem he had solved, a note he hoped Elias would one day discover. Then a small thud. From Elias's breast pocket, an old notebook slipped free, tumbling to the floor and flipping open as though eager to reveal a long-buried secret. The cover was frayed at the corners, the pages yellowed with age, the faded letters on the front, worn, nearly smooth by time. Carter froze, eyes locked on it. Instinct moved him. Before thought did he bent down and picked it up. His small hands brushed the open page. His eyes widened. Neat slanted handwriting filled the paper, formulas, diagrams, and thoughtful comments written as if for students. Creative reasoning needs more practice, explaining steps. On the inside cover, one line stood bold, carved like an engraving in stone: excellence in mathematics education award, 2015, Riverside Elementary. Property of Mr. Elias Flynn. Carter's heart seemed to stop. He lifted his gaze, stunned wonder washing over his face. The man the whole building knew only by mop and cart had once been an award-winning teacher. Elias spun around, startled, and saw Carter holding the notebook. For an instant, panic flashed in his eyes. His steps faltered, his breath caught. His hand reached out quickly, as though to cover the past before it could be seen. Carter. His voice fell low, tinged with shame, and an ache too deep to name. He shook his head gently, unwilling for the boy to peer into the part of his life he had folded shut and hidden away. Carter lifted his gaze slowly, eyes shining with layers of feeling: curiosity, sympathy, and something like awe. You used to be a teacher." His voice trembled, as though speaking louder might break the fragile truth. Elias didn't answer right away. He took the notebook back, his fingers trembling as they brushed the worn cover, as if touching a scar, long healed yet still tender. He closed it tight and pressed it against his chest, his eyes dropping to the glossy floor, avoiding the boy's gaze. For one fleeting moment, the calm mask Elias always wore cracked, revealing a man who had lost something, who no longer stood where he once belonged. "It's an old story, kid," he murmured, a thin, weary smile flickering before fading. "Now I'm just the man who keeps these floors clean." But Carter, whose young heart had only just begun to glow with hope from those secret notes, saw more than that. He saw a forgotten teacher, a mind hidden beneath the dark blue uniform. He hugged his backpack tight to his chest and whispered like a vow, "I won't forget this." And in that neon-lit hallway, amidst the lemon scent and the quiet hum of a cleaning cart, the moment became a milestone. A boy had found a true teacher in the janitor, and a man, though he longed to deny, it could not hide the light that was always his. Chapter 5: The Midnight Conversation. The 36th floor supply room was narrow just enough to hold a few cleaning chemicals and an old metal table. A dim yellow bulb cast trembling blotches of light on the walls, as if the room itself was shivering in silence. It was a space meant only for mops and buckets, and yet tonight it had become a refuge for two people who seemed to belong to opposite worlds. Evelyn sat across from Elias, her dark suit making her look like a statue misplaced in such a humble room. In her hands was a paper cup of coffee, gripped so tightly the thin cardboard bent out of shape. The steam was faint, not strong enough to drive out the cold creeping up from the tiled floor, but strong enough to anchor her here in a conversation she knew she could no longer avoid. Elias sat quietly opposite his sturdy frame wrapped in a faded blue uniform. On the table lay his old notebook, his calloused hand brushing its worn edge as though tracing scars, long healed but still tender. For a while he said nothing. Then finally, his voice came rough yet warm. "Carter isn't like other children. The boy, he has a way of seeing things. I only did what any teacher should show him, that numbers know how to tell stories." Evelyn fell still. She had come armed with a speech about boundaries, about roles, about how inappropriate it was for a janitor to be teaching her son. But when she met Elias's steady eyes, the words dissolved, crumbling like salt in water. Instead, she heard herself ask a question that even surprised her. Why? Why would an award-winning teacher become a janitor? The room went silent. Elias lifted his gaze, and in his pale brown eyes, there was both shadow and light like two skies colliding. He drew in a breath, then let it out slowly, releasing a truth that had weighed on his chest for years. "My wife died of cancer. When it happened, everything collapsed. I couldn't stand before a class without seeing the empty chair where she used to sit for parent nights. The hospital bills. I couldn't keep up. This job paid enough to care for Sarah, and it let me be home with her during the day. Teaching was once the air I breathed, but after losing her, I had no breath left to give." Evelyn's grip loosened on the coffee cup. The rising steam blurred her vision for a moment. The man she had seen only as bent over a mop became in her eyes a widower, a father holding together what little remained of his family. The icy glass of judgment she had clutched for so long cracked under a hairline fracture. "Elias." She whispered his name softer than she'd ever spoken it. Her gray eyes, usually so severe, softened with a rare veil of compassion. I misjudged you." Elias shook his head, a thin, weary smile touching his lips. "It's all right. Most people only see the mop before they see me." He paused, fingers resting on the notebook, as if to steady himself. "But Carter is different. He sees the stories inside the numbers. And maybe he sees in me something more than a man who cleans floors." In that moment, Evelyn felt her heart ease. Within those narrow walls and trembling yellow light, she was no longer the cold CEO of Sterling, and he was no longer just the janitor. They were two souls tested by fate, each carrying loss, each trying to preserve a fragment of hope for their children. Her eyes lingered on his calloused hands, hands that once held chalk and drew formulas now wrapped around rags and brooms. And for the first time, Evelyn didn't see class or hierarchy. She saw courage. In that tender silence, an invisible thread tied itself between them. And Evelyn knew this midnight conversation wasn't only changing how she saw another man. It was beginning to change how she saw herself. Chapter 6. The Scholarship Exam. The Sterling Conference Hall gleamed with grandeur, chandeliers spilling light onto long rows of spotless white desks. At first, the low murmur of hundreds of students filled the space, but when the signal was given, silence fell so heavy it carried the sound of pages turning pencils, tapping softly against paper. At desk 47, Carter sat upright. Before him lay a thick exam packet, its white pages catching the ceiling lights as weighty as a small mountain. He drew in a breath and recalled the rhythm Elias had taught him: leaves the hand, travels, arrives. Fear rippled through his chest for a fleeting second, then ebbed away like a wave dissolving on sand. High above in the gallery, Evelyn clasped her hands so tightly her knuckles turned pale. The face that was usually carved in steel now bore fine cracks of worry. Each time Carter bent to write, her heart pounded as though every pencil stroke carried not only his grade, but his entire future. Behind the rows of parents, among technicians fussing with microphones and lights, Elias stood quietly in the shadows. In his deep blue janitor's uniform, he drew no notice, but his eyes never strayed from desk 47. In his pocket, his fingers wrapped around a worn marker, holding it like a hidden charm for the boy. Carter opened the test. The first line of numbers rushed at him like soldiers in formation. His hand trembled, but then he closed his eyes, heard Elias's steady voice. "Don't look at the symbols first. Read the story." He looked again, and the geometry problem shifted. No longer rigid lines, it became a sailboat cutting into the wind. In physics, equations of motion transformed into astronauts racing to measure oxygen for their return to Earth. In probability, the numbers turned into pirates dividing treasure on a storm-tossed ship. Each problem came alive, and Carter smiled. For the first time in an exam, he wasn't afraid. He was on an adventure. Every page was a map, every question a voyage. From her seat above, Evelyn froze at the sight of that smile. She was so used to seeing her son hunched eyes hollow before a test. But today, he leaned into his work with clear eyes and a glimmer at his lips. A fragile trust stirred in her chest, and her breath felt lighter. Elias saw it too. As Carter bent to jot notes, as his shoulders steadied, not with dread, but with the stance of a guide, warmth filled Elias's chest. He gave the smallest nod from the shadows. Carter seemed to catch it. His back straightened. His hand moved swift and sure. 3 hours swept by like wind. Some students stood to turn in papers, their faces mixed with confidence or defeat. Carter remained combing through every number, every step. No sailor left behind, no astronaut lost in the void, he told himself, hearing echoes of those late-night hallway stories. When the proctor called 1 minute, Carter set his pencil down. He looked at the pages dense with answers. In that instant, he lifted his eyes. Evelyn leaned forward, her smile trembling through tears streaming silently down her cheeks. He turned again, finding Elias in the crowd of staff. The man gave a single nod, tiny, but to Carter, it was the greatest confirmation of all. "You did it. Time's up." The command rang. Pencils dropped in unison. For a heartbeat, silence pressed on the room, then shattered into footsteps scraping chairs and sighs of relief. But for Carter, the loudest sound was his own heartbeat, not frantic with fear, but pulsing with simple joy. For the first time in his life, he hadn't just survived an exam. He had truly enjoyed it. Chapter 7. The Embrace Before the Cameras. The last sound of the exam faded, and the hall erupted. Chairs scraped back, whispers of nervous excitement spread like ripples across the rows of desks. In the gallery above, parents leaned forward, their eyes straining with expectation. Down by the press seats, camera lenses swung toward the children who had just laid down their pencils, ready to capture the moment of successor youth proving themselves. And in that sea of faces, Carter shot to his feet. He didn't look at the proctors. He didn't turn toward his mother. His small legs carried him forward, shoes pounding against the polished floor, past rows of desks, past stunned stares of examiners and students alike. His white shirt fluttered as he ran the number 47 on his chest, shaking like a flag of triumph. He stopped only when he reached the familiar figure at the edge of the hall, a man in a janitor's uniform standing quietly among the technicians. Without a second thought, Carter threw his arms around Elias. A storm of camera clicks burst out, flashes exploding like fireworks. For a heartbeat, Elias froze. He was not used to sudden embraces, much less being the center of attention in the blinding glare of cameras. But then he felt the boy's small frame trembling with joy in his arms. Slowly, he let go of his hesitation. His calloused hands closed gently around Carter, holding him with all the warmth of a father, all the care of a teacher who thought he'd never stand in this place again. Tears spilled down Carter's cheeks, not the tears of failure, but of release. "I did it, sir," he whispered, voice shaking but radiant. Elias bowed his head and murmured back, "Not because you were perfect, but because you believed you could." Up in the gallery, Evelyn rose abruptly. In that moment, her heart seemed to shatter and mend at once. Her son, the boy, who once hunched in despair, head buried in shame, was now shining in the arms of the man she had once dismissed as inappropriate. Her vision blurred. Her lashes grew heavy with tears. And for the first time in public, Evelyn allowed them to fall. She stepped down, the click of her heels echoing across the hushed hall. The crowd of reporters braced for a storm of outrage, but instead, Evelyn stopped before Elias. She reached out her hand, slight tremor, but steady at its core. "Thank you," she said, her voice strong enough to carry through the hall. "Thank you for seeing what I could not." Elias lifted his head, eyes rimmed red. His rough hand closed over hers, gripping firmly. The contrast of their hands, calloused and refined, held fast under a forest of lenses. A handshake that dissolved the distance of class, opening a new road where knowledge, compassion, and humanity stood higher than any title. At the back, a few scattered claps began. Then louder, then steady, until the entire hall thundered in applause, shaking the high ceiling, echoing like a hymn of justice fulfilled. In the glare of flashbulbs, three figures formed a strange circle, a boy clinging to his quiet teacher, and a powerful mother bowing her head in gratitude. That moment was no longer theirs alone. It became a story, a captured image, a reminder to the world that wisdom and kindness often bloom where we least expect them. Chapter 8. The Learning Center is born. The old storage room, once dark and heavy with the smell of cleaning supplies, had been reborn. The gray walls were now painted in bright colors, covered with children's drawings. A ship cutting through waves, an astronaut floating across the galaxy, numbers transformed into cheerful characters. Warm yellow light spilled from new lamps, filling the narrow space with life. Where once stood buckets and mops, there were now small desks, shelves of books, boxes of crayons, and a clean whiteboard standing tall at the center. Elias stood at the board marker in hand, his deep voice rolling through the room like a conductor guiding a young orchestra. He wasn't just writing formulas. He was sketching vivid images, a dragon guarding treasure to represent an unknown variable, a curved trajectory as a ball sailing across the park. With each drawing, the children laughed, their eyes glowing like little candles. At the front desk sat Carter, no longer the timid boy haunted by failing grades. He now stepped forward, with confidence, showing a classmate how to solve a math problem by turning it into a game of sharing slices of cake. Beside him, Sarah, 7 years old, with her fine brown hair, clutched her notebook tightly, her wide eyes sparkling. She handed an inhaler to a classmate who began to cough, then scampered off to bring chalk to Elias. The two of them had become little assistant teachers, learning and helping all at once, their laughter filling the room like a festival. At the doorway, Evelyn stood quietly. Her arms were crossed, but no longer in her usual defensive stance. On her carefully made-up face rested a rare, gentle smile. Her eyes shimmered as though she had just rediscovered a part of herself she thought long lost. This woman, who once measured worth in grades and financial reports, now watched her son teach others with confidence. When she looked at Elias, she no longer saw just a janitor, or even just a teacher. She saw a bridge connecting children to the joy of learning and connecting her to what truly mattered. The room pulsed with sound, the squeak of marker on board, the cheers of children solving an astronaut problem, Sarah's giggles when Carter spoke in a pirate's voice. At the center of it all stood Elias, his eyes alight. He had once believed his life had ended with that old teaching notebook, but now before him was a new chapter, where numbers no longer lay flat and lifeless, but became stories where children learned not to fear failure. Evelyn placed a hand on the doorframe, her heart swelling with hope. She thought to herself, perhaps this was the true sterling legacy, not profits, but a generation of children learning to believe in themselves. And in that warm little room, filled with bright drawings and gentle light, a learning center was born, small in size, but carrying a great promise that every child who walked inside could discover their own story hidden within the once intimidating world of numbers. Chapter 9: A Warm Winter. The grand courtyard before Sterling Enterprises, so often severe with stone steps and stark white lamps, wore a different face tonight. Snow had fallen all day, blanketing every surface, turning the company grounds into a sparkling winter painting. Golden light from the lampposts spilled onto the powdery white, scattering into 1,000 glimmers like stars fallen to earth. Here there was no sternness of finance, no hurried shadows of directors rushing by. Only 4 souls remained gathered in the simple joy of play. Evelyn slipped off her elegant black gloves so she could mold the snow into round, compact spheres. For the first time in years, the hands that once signed million-dollar contracts ached with cold from snow, and she did not mind. Elias bent low, his calloused hands skillfully packing snowballs. He laughed heartily when Carter's throw struck his shoulder, then staggered dramatically like a warrior toppled in battle. Sarah, small but sprightly, squealed with delight, her cheeks flushed red, her usual cough forgotten in the magic of the moment. "Now it's my turn to give Mom a challenge," Carter shouted, eyes bright. Quickly, he drew a large circle in the snow and marked 3 numbers at 3 points with a stick. "Okay, Mom, how do you throw this snowball so it lands right in the middle?" Evelyn laughed, a little uncertain. Math had never been something that felt light to her, But seeing her son's eager eyes, she remembered Elias's words. Don't look at the symbols. Look at the story. She drew in a breath, shut her eyes, and tossed. The snowball flew in an awkward arc and landed just at the edge of the circle. Carter and Sarah clapped wildly, laughing until they toppled over, while Elias gave a slow, approving nod. That's trajectory, Evelyn. Elias said, his voice warm. And sometimes you don't have to hit the exact center, only close enough to want to try again. Her eyes met his. In the swirl of falling snow and the bright laughter of children, they found a quiet harmony. No longer CEO and janitor, just a mother and a father sharing peace through their children. Carter and Sarah kept running circles, their voices ringing out as snow burst into the air around them. Evelyn and Elias stood side by side, their breath rising in soft clouds into the cold night. Evelyn tilted her head and whispered, I can't remember the last time I laughed this much. Elias smiled, his gaze tender. Winter is cold, but just a little laughter is enough to make it warm. And in that moment, though snow kept falling, none of them felt the chill. 4 people, 4 hearts, each carrying old wounds, had found warmth in one another. Beneath the golden lamps, laughter mixed with the falling snow, writing a memory that would never melt away. Chapter 10. The Torchbearer. A year later, the Sterling conference hall shone bright once more. But this time, Carter was no longer hunched at desk 47, trembling before a blank sheet of paper. He stood on a small stage at the front, holding a mini whiteboard, his face radiant beneath the golden light. Before him, dozens of young faces, tilted upward, eyes wide with eagerness, waiting for something more than dry numbers. Do you like adventures? Carter began, his voice clear, carrying a confidence far beyond his 11 years. Hands shot into the air, cheers rippling across the room. Smiling, he wrote a simple equation, then sketched a pirate ship with tiny sailors scrambling over barrels of gold. This isn't just a vision, he explained. It's a story how to share treasure so every sailor gets a part and still have enough left to reach the island of gold. Laughter burst out, little eyes sparkling. One girl piped up, "What if a big wave comes?" Carter nodded, his eyes alight with recognition. "Great question. Then we calculate again. Shift the angle, change the story. There's no failure, only another way to tell the journey." At the back of the hall, Evelyn sat still, her hand resting gently on Sarah's shoulder. She gazed at her son, the boy, once caged by fear of red marks, now standing tall, passing on the flame he himself had been given. Pride swelled inside her, laced with gratitude. Beside her, Elias watched, his pale brown eyes glowing as though he had just witnessed his life regain its meaning. On the board, Carter now drew a spaceship arcing around the Earth. "This is a problem about trajectory," he said, his voice steady. "But for me, it's a question, does the astronaut have enough fuel to make it home? And if we calculate carefully, the answer is always yes." Giggles and claps rose together. In Carter's eyes, there was no trace of fear, only the steady light of someone who had crossed the valley of shadows and found the guiding thread. He was no longer just learning to survive. He had become a bridge, handing hope to others. From the front row, a timid 8-year-old raised his hand. "Carter, what if I get it wrong a lot?" The room stilled. Carter crouched slightly, his expression soft, a smile curving warm at his lips. "Being wrong isn't your enemy," he said. "It's your guide. Every mistake is one step closer to right. Mistakes are how I found joy, and you will too. Evelyn's breath caught. His words echoed Elias's voice from long ago, yet fresher, brighter, the flame passed to a new generation. Elias gave a small nod, lips moving soundlessly. The boy has learned. The lesson ended in a storm of applause. Children rushed forward laughing, asking for more pirates, more astronauts. Sarah clasped Carter's hand, her eyes twinkling like tiny stars. Evelyn approached, watching the three of them together. Her heart swelling, no longer scattered pieces, they were a family. As the late afternoon light poured through the tall windows, Carter looked around, his heart full. He knew his journey wasn't finished. It was only beginning. The torch once given to him by a forgotten teacher now burned in his own hands, ready to light the world. Night fell over Manhattan towers, gleaming like giant shards of crystal. Through the learning center's wide windows, the city lights reflected like a river of stars. Inside the room glowed with soft gold, not the harsh glare of boardrooms, not the sterile chill of neon halls, but a warmth that filled the empty spaces of the soul. At the front desks, Carter and Sarah bent over their notebooks, whispering, laughing more than counting. On the board, Carter's last drawing remained a spaceship alongside equations, a proof that learning was no longer a sentence, but a shared adventure. Sarah laughed, hair spilling over her shoulders, while Carter proudly pointed his pen at the island of treasure that was the correct answer. Behind them stood Evelyn and Elias. She in her long coat, a file still in her hand, forgotten, unopened. When his hand brushed lightly against hers, she didn't draw back as she once had. That small touch was enough, a quiet agreement they had walked far enough through loss to find solid ground again, where family was not measured in achievements, but in moments of peace. Their eyes met. In Evelyn's, no longer the cold CEO, but a mother fulfilled. In Elias's, no longer the shame of a janitor, but the pride of a teacher restored. Between them, no words, only a shared smile that said, "We healed each other." Outside, the city roared on. But within the warm, golden room, all was quiet, whole. 4 lives once broken had come together into a single picture of family. And from them shone a message. True love makes no distinction between rich and poor. It heals, restores faith, and awakens strength in ordinary souls. And the storyteller whispers, as if to each listener by their bedside, "Do you believe a single act can change a destiny? If this story touched your heart, leave a comment and rate it from 0 to 10. And don't forget subscribe and ring the bell for the next story. Because sometimes the greatest miracles aren't far away. They live right in the moment you choose to believe in kindness.